The news cycle moves so fast. You probably find yourself wondering, whatever happened to that one case I heard about on CityCast Las Vegas 6 months ago? Or did the government ever fix that one thing? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we bring you updates that close some loops and bring you up to the moment with lingering stories. We've got KTNV Channel 13 senior news reporter Jaewon Jung and Hey Las Vegas newsletter editor Rob Kachelriess, and we're going to talk about the sentencing of the man who jumped the bench to go after his judge, the Tupac and bad Metro cop trials, and yet another twist on the Lundy Elementary School up on Mount Charleston. It's Tuesday, December 17th. I'm Dayvid Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. So we've had some big headlines, and then they disappear, and then they come back again. So let's start with the fellow who made international headlines, a viral video seen by millions of people of him during his sentencing, not allowing the judge to get the final words out and literally bounding over the bench where a very scary minute of activity occurred. So, Jaewon, tell us about that one.
Yeah,
that guy.
I think everyone has seen the video at this point. It's kind of incredible. Whenever I travel to a different state, everyone there has seen the video, and it just makes you realize how viral it's gotten. I saw a lot of people were surprised by his sentencing from this judge attack because he got 26 years upwards, I think.
Yeah, minimum, right?
Minimum of 26 years. I saw a lot of people were surprised by that, but I think people also have to realize that he has a very extensive criminal record.
I mean, just for clarity, he got 65 years with eligibility for parole after he's done 26. So decades in prison for this attack. What was your takeaway from the sentencing, Rob?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you see that sentencing, you go, wow, like this seems pretty high. You know, trust me, I'm not a light on crime type of person. I was expecting him to get a serious sentence. I was expecting some punishment here, but I mean, that minimum sentence of 26 years up to, I believe it was 65 years, you see convicted murderers get off with far less sometimes. So Dayvid Figler, as our in-house resident lawyer, I was curious about your thoughts on it, because is this a case of one judge kind of looking out for their own and trying to send a message that wouldn't be handed out otherwise?
There are a lot of twists and turns to this that I don't think are being reported or certainly not being reported enough. Jaewon, you did talk about his extensive criminal history, and certainly by number of offenses in his past, there were quite a few, more than a little, for sure. But most of those were tied to his very well-documented mental illness. And he was actually in the court's mental health court for 7 years for a lot of those crimes. And that's more reflective of, needing to treat him a little bit differently because of his mental disorders. And it seemed like that judge in that courtroom kind of had a grasp on who the individual was. His name is Deobra Redden. And kind of worked with and through the process. And then, there was also the idea that the sentencing that he was getting initially was also outsized, and that was part of the reason why he may have snapped. Look, the bottom line here is that the judge who sentenced him, Judge Susan Johnson, said the words, this isn't just an attack on Judge Mary Kay Holthus, this is an attack on all of the judiciary. In other words, all of them. And that, to me, was a little bit troubling. And it might, if somebody takes this guy's cause up, maybe send it back for a new resentencing, because it seemed like it was a little personal. If we look at the actual facts of the case, the judge who was attacked was back to work the next day, not shortly after. She's posing with smiles with people like Dana White on social media. Not to say it wasn't scary.
Not to diminish her injury, not to diminish, her attack.
I'm sure it was very scary. And, she did testify. She thought she was going to be murdered, but she came away with slight bruising. And also the whole thing lasted 58 seconds, which was probably an eternity for the judge. I don't want to diminish that. But for a 58-second account where the person was just bruised, I mean, we see bar fights with a lot more damage and people getting 6 months. So 26 to 65 years, I don't know. I mean, Jaewon, are you hearing? I mean, you said you're hearing from the public that seemed a little high.
Yeah,
Is it
definitely.
so high that people are like outraged? Or do they go like, well, whatever, he's going away forever. One less bad guy on the street?
I think it's sort of been a mixed reaction. People are definitely surprised by how high the sentencing was. Like Rob mentioned, usually you see 26 to 65 years for attempted murder convictions or murder convictions. So I think the general public did think that his sentencing was a little bit high. You mentioned that the judge, she came back to work pretty shortly after the attack, but there was also a marshal who was really
He
badly
slipped.
hurt.
Yeah, he slipped when he was going to render aid and he hit his head against the wall. But that wasn't a direct attack.
Right, not a direct attack, but sort of inadvertently hurt. And he didn't get back to work until like 7 months later. I remember when I was covering the Robert Tellis trial, one of the court marshals was telling me like, oh, finally he's back to work. I'm like, now he's back to work? It was already like August by that time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another aspect that isn't talked about. But I do remember during the sentencing from Judge Mary Kay Holthus that was supposed to happen, the judge did talk to him before the attack saying like, well, we already tried sending you to mental health court and we already tried doing this. And then I think she says it's time for you to get a taste of something else. And then that's when he loses it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he might have not been informed that was even a possibility because of some of the twists and turns of how that plea bargain went along. And speaking of plea bargains, it is also kind of a lost fact here that while they had started a trial on attempt murder, that the individual had essentially pled guilty and did ultimately plead guilty to everything he was charged with. And there were a lot of criticisms that he was being overcharged because of who the victim here was. But he pled straight up guilty to everything. And, you know, usually when that happens, people depend on a little mercy from the court. And that sentence doesn't sound like mercy. You know what? An interesting part of the Deobra Redden case is that they did talk about his prior history of all these different crimes, one of which had an impact on the original sentencing judge was that he had assaulted a police officer. I actually found that case, and the police officer he allegedly assaulted is a fellow named Kevin Menon. And Kevin Menon said when he was interviewing Deobra Redden that Deobra had lit a cigarette and the cop Menon felt in fear of his life, and that's how that kind of came about. Jaewon, the name Kevin Menon probably means a lot to you. That's another story that we talked about on CityCast with some really interesting turns. Tell us about the Kevin Menon case and who he is.
Sure. So Kevin Menon was a police sergeant for Metro, and he was part of the Convention Center Area Command. He's been with Metro since, I believe, 2014, so about a decade or so, and he was recently promoted to sergeant a few years ago. But recently, he was arrested back this August, and he was accused of essentially setting people up for these bogus arrests in his area command, which is basically the strip area, mostly tourists. And if you look at all of these arrests, they're virtually all Black men. So it was very interesting. But the story gets even wilder because shortly after he was arrested on oppression under color of law, he was arrested again because police said they found possession of child sex abuse material on 3 of his devices. I think it's now 4 of his devices. So it's just gotten to be a very complicated and interesting case.
And 2 totally unrelated cases too, right?
Yes, totally unrelated cases. So what happened was after he was arrested on those first charges, police got a search warrant to look through all of his devices, and they sort of came across it while they were investigating the first case.
Now, there were some other things that came out in your reporting about that he had lied about going to Harvard or something too. I mean, tell me about what else we're finding out about this Kevin Menon and how he was able to stay on the police force so long.
Yeah, so if you look at the grand jury testimony, first of all, one thing I thought that was interesting from the grand jury proceedings was everyone they brought to the stand was part of Metro. They didn't bring any of the people who were falsely arrested as witnesses, which I thought that was interesting. So the whole Harvard thing, that came up in the grand jury transcripts as well. A couple of officers said they felt like they couldn't speak up about Menon and his alleged actions because, first of all, they felt like his chain of command wouldn't do anything. And then second of all, they said he talked about his past experience being in counterterrorism and in the gang unit, and that he went to an Ivy League school. So they felt like, well, this guy obviously is smart and has a lot of experience. I can't speak up about anything or else it's going to backfire on me. I'm still a new officer in this department. What I've been able to find in my reporting is that Kevin Menon probably didn't do it alone. He was in a Signal group text chain, which, by the way, Signal is an app that it's sort of like WhatsApp where you can
encrypted
talk to each
communications.
other. Encrypted communications. You can set up the messages to delete automatically. And that's exactly what the officers were doing in his department. They were setting up messages to automatically delete. When on the Signal app, if you do set up those messages to delete, there's a little timer icon that shows up on the bottom of the message bubble. And there were only 3 screenshots that were shown to the grand jury as evidence because one of the officers testified that he took the screenshots in case he ever needed it. So that's why those are the only screenshots that we have. But they show that he wasn't texting himself. He was texting other officers. And then also his lieutenant testified to the grand jury that he was part of the group chat. So it just makes you question how far up the chain of command does this go? And were other people a part of these arrest tactics?
And a lot of these arrests were caught on video, right?
Yes. A lot of them were caught on body cam video, on surveillance video. One of the victims, or alleged victims, since I guess Kevin Menon is still innocent until proven guilty, he said that he was shoulder checked by Sergeant Menon, who was a plainclothes officer that day. And then shortly after he was shoulder checked, 2 uniformed officers took him into handcuffs. But the body cam video doesn't really show the whole shoulder checking situation. It's the surveillance video from the Bellagio that catches that.
You know, Rob, you've done some reporting about this too in the Hey Las Vegas newsletter. This Signal thing is really interesting because, as I understand it, it's against Metro policy for officers to be communicating outside of the normal channels on an encrypted site. Do you think that there's going to be more to the story, or do you think that everything is kind of being scapegoated on Kevin Menon here?
I mean, it's very interesting because, that's the whole point of having body cameras in the first place is transparency. And I've heard that officers themselves tend to like having the body cameras because it does show what's going on. And by using the Signal app, you are starting to hide what's going on and effectively erasing what's a virtual paper trail, so to speak. Yeah. So you got to wonder, okay, why did they make this decision and why were they following this practice of using this particular app?
You know, Jaewon, right after this happened, a spokesperson for Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department said that Sheriff Kevin McMahill has instituted sort of these early warning systems to catch people doing sort of these things, before they get out of control, like, is alleged here in the Kevin Menon case. Have we heard anything more about this early warning system or why it may have failed here?
I actually have not heard about this early warning system at all. I've tried to talk with Metro several times on the Kevin Menon case. And, I know it probably looks bad for the department, but it's important that they clear up anything they need to clear up from their side. And as a journalist, it's important for me to get both sides of the story. If it's just Kevin Menon being the only one doing it, then they have to speak up and say that. But my communications with them throughout my 2 to 3 months of reporting on this case has been virtually nothing. They've just not gotten back to me. I had to go to a fiscal affairs committee meeting, which is one of those meetings that Metro has quarterly just to talk about budget. I planned to go there to talk to the sheriff because I wasn't going to accept no for an answer. And that's when he just said, it's against our policy. And what was interesting to me was
What
I
was
asked
against
him,
our policy?
the use of the Signal app.
Oh, okay.
hmm So then I asked him, like, what are you doing to ensure there's transparency in your department? And his answer was so interesting. He said, I plan to hold Mr. Menon accountable in a lot of different ways. So there is this push towards Mr. Menon and Mr. Menon only.
Yeah. I guess for full disclosure, I have to say that when I was practicing law, my law firm and I was specifically assigned a case where Kevin Menon was sued for oppression, basically under color of law.
Was that a federal case?
It was a federal case, and it's been reported, so I'm not giving any attorney-client privilege, that case was settled the day that Menon was arrested. But it was a man of color, it was a black man, who also is a surgeon, who was pulled over for a failure to signal or something, and Menon pushed an arrest of him and actually, injured him, and he wound up going to jail for that. One other thing I want to talk about really quick, Jaewon, because I know you were covering it. One of the most exciting news items in Las Vegas in recent memory was the arrest made in connection with the longtime unsolved murder of Tupac Shakur way back in 1996. The person who was arrested, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis. Any new information on that, or why is that one taking so long to kind of come to an end?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of fight back and forth between the attorneys. One thing I do want to mention that's interesting is that Deobra Redden's attorney is also Keefe D's attorney, and Carl Arnold is representing both of them. The last I heard of Keefe D, he was still trying to get out on bail, and the judge wanted to ensure that the funds for the bail were legitimate, but she couldn't confirm that, so she denied bail.
Whoa.
And that was sort of the last thing I've heard. And it's been a few months since really the case has moved forward. But I think the trial date is set for early next year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, almost a 30-year-old murder. Why rush now, right? Except that there's a guy in custody. Let's go into the last one. This is interesting because we keep giving updates because it keeps kind of switching. Way back when Hurricane Hillary was threatening to wipe Las Vegas off the face of the earth, we were spared, but our friends up on Mount Charleston were not. And it caused some real devastation up there, including the closure of a long-time beloved elementary school. And that looked like it was a done issue, that they were just going to abandon that building. And yet, Rob, we have an update on that one too?
Yeah, this is the story that keeps on giving. So just for reference, Hurricane Hillary struck in 2023. So we've been dealing with this since then, or Mount Charleston has been dealing with it more accurately. And everything changed when a new appointee came onto the Clark County School District Board, and that was Nakia Jackson Hale. And this is the kind of person who definitely makes the most of her time because she replaced trustee Katie Williams, who you might remember.
Oh, yeah. That was a short-time replacement for the
yes.
board of trustee who wasn't here, who didn't live in Las Vegas.
Right. Katie Williams was basically forced out of the position when it was revealed that she lived not only out of the county, but out of state.
Yeah.
So Jackson Hale was appointed to replace her as interim trustee on October 30th. So she only had 2 months in the role before the winner of the November election takes over in 2025. So what I like about Jackson Hale is that she said that if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And she immediately made it clear that she was going to reach out to the Mount Charleston community and directly address the Lundy Elementary School issue. Because the students there were basically forced to take this extended commute to school to go to Indian Springs, which is like 45 minutes in each direction.
Wow. Yeah.
So this is something that's been discussed ever since the school on Mount Charleston, Lundy, was damaged in the flooding due to Hillary. So Jackson Hale visited Mount Charleston personally. And I should mention also that Lydia Dominguez, who won the election to take over the seat, visited Mount Charleston as well. And both of them met with parents, saw the school for themselves, and Jackson Hale asked the Board of Trustees to revisit this topic. And they voted in early December, 5-1, to reopen Lundy Elementary School.
Wow. So that's going to be significant repairs, though, yeah?
Yeah. Well, this was a surprisingly quick turnaround because just back in August, the same board voted 4-3 to not open Lundy because those repairs would cost more than $6 million. And if you remember, the deciding vote was Katie Williams, who represented District B, the same district that includes Mount Charleston. So she was voting against the wishes of some of her own parents that she represents while living out of state.
I mean, what is the balance? I mean, that is very expensive, and it's only a handful of students per se, although I understand, elementary schools can be beloved. What do you think about that, Jaewon? You think that the change of heart was justified here?
I really don't know. I think the change of heart was very surprising to a lot of people. And it really does make you think with the Board of Trustee drama, if that played into it.
Rob, what do you think?
It's interesting because, we kind of associate CCSD as being so dysfunctional. And I'm impressed somebody got something done within two months or less. And it shows you that elections matter, these school board positions matter. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of debate over this because the alternative was to actually add classrooms to the library on Mount Charleston. But there was a lot of reasons that didn't really work. There were security issues. There was just logistics issues. And that's not what the Mount Charleston community wanted. And you know what? Speaking of dysfunction in the school district, I mean, we're still waiting to hire a new superintendent.
Well, speaking of that, Rob, there is an update on the superintendent search, and that is the Las Vegas Review-Journal has reported that the interim superintendent, Brenda Larson-Mitchell, has taken her name out of contention for that permanent job. So
interesting, right?
A little more chaos over there, and who knows how that's going to wind down. Well, these updates are fascinating, and we're going to try to keep doing that here at CityCast Las Vegas when we talk about a story that doesn't have a resolution to let people know kind of where it stands. I appreciate Jaewon and Rob, you both coming on to help us do that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, very curious to find out what happened to these stories.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, please go tell a friend. That friend can tell a friend, and then before you know it, everyone's listening. You can also rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.